The tears streaking down Abigail Brennan's pale cheeks glistened in the harsh Arizona sun of 1875, her slender fingers tracing the roughly carved cross that marked the tiny grave before her. 3 days had passed since she'd buried her baby brother, yet the hollow ache in her chest only seemed to deepen with each sunrise that Thomas would never see. The sound of approaching hoofbeats barely registered in her grief-stricken mind. She remained kneeling in the hard-packed dirt, her black mourning dress pulled around her, collecting dust that she couldn't bring herself to care about. The horse snorted and came to a halt several paces behind her, followed by the creak of leather as its rider dismounted. For several moments, nothing but the whisper of the desert wind broke the silence. Then, a shadow fell across the small grave as a tall figure moved to stand beside her. "Madam," came a deep voice, respectful and quiet. "I don't mean to intrude." Abigail didn't look up, her eyes fixed on the name etched into the wooden cross, Thomas James Brennan. Only 4 years old. From the corner of her eye, she saw weathered boots and the movement of a man removing his hat. Dust motes danced in the air between them as he held the worn Stetson against his chest. "Would you mind if I said a prayer with you?" he asked softly. Something in his voice, a genuine kindness that had become so rare in her world, made her finally turn her face upward. The cowboy standing beside her was tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer storm. His dark hair was slightly too long, curling at the nape of his neck, and a thin scar ran along his jawline. "I don't know you," she whispered, her voice hoarse from crying and disuse.
"No, madam."
"Name's Daniel Kincaid." He gestured toward the small cross. "I lost my little sister when I was younger. No one should have to mourn alone." Abigail studied his face, finding nothing but sincerity in his expression. After a long moment, she nodded once and turned back to the grave. Daniel Kincaid knelt beside her in the dust, still holding his hat respectfully against his chest, and bowed his head. His deep voice carried softly on the breeze as he spoke words of comfort that somehow eased the tight band of grief around Abigail's heart, if only for a moment. Neither of them could have known then how their lives would intertwine in the months ahead, or that this moment of shared grief would be the first step on a journey that would heal wounds far deeper than those visible to the eye. The Broken Bee Ranch had been Abigail's home since she was born 20 years earlier. Once a thriving cattle operation under her father's careful management, it had slowly declined after his death 3 years ago. Her mother, unable to bear the grief of losing her husband, had followed him to the grave just 6 months later, leaving Abigail to care for young Thomas and the struggling ranch. When the fever took Thomas, Abigail felt as though the last light in her world had been extinguished. She had buried him on the small hill overlooking the ranch house, beneath the cottonwood tree where he had loved to play. As Daniel finished his prayer, Abigail found her voice again. "Thank you." He nodded, rising to his feet and offering her his hand. After a moment's hesitation, she accepted it, letting him help her up from the ground. "You're at the Broken Bee?" he asked, glancing toward the ranch buildings visible in the distance.
"Yes."
"It was my father's." She brushed the dust from her skirts, a habit rather than any real concern for appearance. "I should get back. The cattle need checking." Daniel's eyebrows rose slightly. "You're running the ranch by yourself?" A spark of defensiveness flared in Abigail's chest. "I managed just fine, Mr. Kincaid. I meant no disrespect, Mississippi. Brennan. Abigail Brennan. Miss Brennan." "It's a lot of work for anyone, let alone a woman," she finished, her chin lifting. A slight smile crossed his face. "I was going to say one person. The Double K isn't far from here, just north across the valley. My brother and I run it together, and it's still more than we can handle most days." Abigail looked away, embarrassed by her quick assumption. "I apologize, Mr. Kincaid. These past days have been difficult." "No apology needed." He placed his hat back on his head. "If you need any help at the ranch, the offer stands." Neighbors should look out for each other. She studied him for a moment, this stranger who had shown her more kindness in a few minutes than she'd experienced in months. Why would you help me?
You don't even know me.
Daniel's eyes softened as he glanced back at the small grave. Because someone once helped me when I needed it most. Sometimes that's all it takes to keep going. As they walked back toward where his horse was tethered, Abigail found herself noticing details about Daniel Kincaid that she might have missed in her grief. The way he moved with quiet confidence, the gentleness in his handling of his horse, the respectful distance he maintained as they walked. "How did you come to be passing by our land?" she asked. "I was tracking some strays that broke through the fence line during last night's storm," he explained, untying his horse's reins. "Thought I saw them heading this way." Abigail nodded. "I heard a herd moving through early this morning. They might have continued west toward the creek." "That would be my guess, too." He hesitated, then added, "Miss Brennan, I don't mean to pry, but do you have anyone staying with you at the ranch? Family or hands?" The question stung, reminding her of how utterly alone she now was. "My last ranch hand quit 2 weeks ago. Said he couldn't work for a woman anymore. I've been managing." Daniel frowned. "These are dangerous times to be alone, especially for, I have my father's rifle, and I know how to use it," she interrupted. Then, softer, "But thank you for your concern, Mr. Kincaid." He mounted his horse with the ease of a man who'd spent most of his life in the saddle. Looking down at her, his expression turned serious. "If you hear 3 shots in succession, that's a signal for help. Works both ways. Remember that." Before Abigail could respond, he tipped his hat and urged his horse forward, riding in the direction of the creek to continue his search for the strays. She watched him go, a strange mixture of emotions churning within her. For the first time since Thomas's death, something besides grief occupied her thoughts. She wasn't sure if she should be grateful for the distraction or guilty for feeling anything but sorrow. Turning back toward her brother's grave, she whispered a final goodbye before beginning the walk back to the empty ranch house that no longer felt like home. The next morning dawned bright and merciless, the summer heat already building as Abigail rose from her bed. Sleep had been elusive, filled with dreams of Thomas calling for her and the strange cowboy kneeling beside her in prayer. She moved through her morning routine mechanically, feeding the few chickens that remained, drawing water from the well, and preparing a simple breakfast that she barely tasted. The tasks that once brought her purpose now felt like nothing more than motions to go through, empty rituals in a life that had lost its meaning. By mid-morning, she had saddled her mare, Penny, and was riding the perimeter of her property to check the fences. It was work she'd done alongside her father since she was old enough to ride, and later taught to Thomas, his small face serious as he tried to understand the importance of strong boundaries. The memory brought fresh tears to her eyes, which she angrily brushed away. Tears wouldn't fix the broken fence posts or keep predators from her remaining cattle. Tears wouldn't pay the mortgage that the bank in Willow Springs was threatening to foreclose on. As she rounded the northeast corner of the property, she spotted a rider approaching from the direction of what must be the Double K Ranch. Even at a distance, she recognized Daniel Kincaid's broad shoulders and the way he sat his horse. Abigail straightened in her saddle, suddenly conscious of her appearance. She wore men's trousers beneath a split riding skirt, practical clothing her father had encouraged despite the town's disapproval, and her dark hair was pulled back in a simple braid. Her hands were already dirty from repairing a section of fence earlier that morning. She considered riding in another direction to avoid the encounter, but something held her in place. Perhaps it was simple curiosity, or perhaps the prospect of human conversation after days of silence was too tempting to resist. Daniel raised a hand in greeting as he approached, his horse slowing to a walk. "Miss Brennan," he called. "Good morning." "Mr. Kincaid," she returned, nodding. "Did you find your strays?"
"4 of them, yes."
He brought his horse alongside hers. "Still missing 2 heifers, but they'll turn up. They always do." An awkward silence fell between them, broken only by the occasional stamp of their horses' hooves. "I brought you something," Daniel finally said, reaching into his saddlebag. He pulled out a parcel wrapped in brown paper. "My brother Andrew makes the best sourdough west of the Mississippi. Thought you might appreciate some fresh bread." The unexpected kindness caught Abigail off guard. She accepted the package, its warmth seeping through the paper into her hands. "That's very thoughtful. Thank you." "It's nothing," he said, looking slightly embarrassed. Andrew would have come himself, but he's laid up with a bad ankle after a horse stepped on him last week. "I'm sorry to hear that. I hope he recovers quickly." Daniel nodded, then gestured toward the fence line she'd been riding. "Checking boundaries?"
Yes.
"The north section needs the most work. I've been patching where I can, but—" She trailed off, not wanting to admit how overwhelming the task had become. "I could help," he offered. "I've got a few hours before I need to get back." Abigail hesitated. Pride urged her to decline, to prove she could manage on her own. But practicality won out. "I would appreciate that, Mr. Kincaid." "Daniel," he corrected with a small smile. "If we're going to be fixing fences together, seems formal to stand on ceremony." Despite everything, Abigail found herself returning his smile.
Daniel, then.
"And I'm Abigail." They rode side by side toward the damaged section of fence, and for the first time in days, Abigail felt the suffocating weight of grief ease just enough to draw a full breath. Working alongside Daniel proved surprisingly comfortable. He was skilled and efficient, respecting her knowledge of her own land without question. They fell into an easy rhythm, with Abigail holding post steady while Daniel drove them into the hard ground, then working together to secure the wire. "You're good at this," he commented as she expertly twisted wire around a post. "Most ranch owners I know would be directing from the shade, not getting their hands dirty." "My father believed in knowing every aspect of the ranch operation," she explained, wiping sweat from her brow with her sleeve. "Said you can't properly manage what you don't understand." "Sounds like a wise man."
He was.
Abigail paused, memories washing over her. Everyone respected James Brennan. He was fair, honest. People listened when he spoke. "And now they don't listen to you," Daniel observed quietly. Abigail's hands stilled on the wire. "No," she admitted. "They don't. The bank, the merchants in town, the remaining ranchers. They all just wait for me to fail. Sometimes I think they're counting on it." Daniel drove the next post with more force than necessary. People fear what challenges their expectations. A woman successfully running a ranch challenges a lot of expectations. "It doesn't matter anyway," she said, her voice hollow. "They might get their wish. Without help, without." She swallowed hard. "I'm not sure how much longer I can hold on." Daniel straightened, studying her face with those intense gray eyes. "How bad is it?" For reasons she couldn't explain, Abigail found herself telling this near stranger what she hadn't admitted to anyone else. "The bank's given me until the end of summer. 3 more months to make the payment or they'll take everything." "How much do you need?" $200. "Might as well be 2,000 for all. I can manage it." Daniel wiped his hands on his jeans, his expression thoughtful. "The cattle drive to Santa Fe leaves in 2 weeks. Andrew and I are taking our herd. You could join us, combine forces. You'd get a better price there than selling locally." Abigail stared at him. "You'd let me join your drive? Why would you do that?" "Because it makes sense," he said simply. "Safety in numbers. Split the costs of the trail hands. And because neighbors help neighbors." "I only have 30 head left," she admitted. "Hardly worth the journey." 30 head at Santa Fe prices is better than 30 head at local prices, he countered. "Think about it at least." Abigail nodded slowly, hope flickering to life despite her efforts to suppress it. "I'll think about it," They finished repairing the fence as the afternoon sun began its descent toward the western horizon. Gathering their tools, they mounted their horses for the ride back to the ranch house. "Will you join me for supper?" Abigail asked impulsively. "It's nothing fancy, but it seems wrong not to offer after all your help today."
Daniel looked surprised, then pleased.
"I'd be honored." As they rode, Abigail found herself noticing things about the land that had escaped her notice in the haze of grief. The wildflowers dotting the fields, the hawks circling lazily overhead, the distant mountains painted in shades of purple against the sky. For the first time since Thomas's death, she felt present in her own life again, even if just for a moment. The ranch house came into view, a simple two-story structure built by her grandfather when he first claimed the land. It had once seemed so full of life. Now it stood quiet, almost accusing in its emptiness. They stabled the horses and washed up at the pump outside before entering the house. Abigail moved about the kitchen with practiced ease, preparing a simple meal of beans, cornbread, and the last of the preserved venison from the previous winter. Daniel insisted on helping, setting the table and stoking the fire in the stove. As they sat down to eat, Abigail realized with a start that this was the first time she'd had company for a meal since the neighbors had brought food after Thomas's funeral. Those visits had been stiff with awkward sympathy, everyone relieved to leave as quickly as politeness allowed. This felt different. Daniel ate with appreciation, complimenting her cooking without excessive flattery. Their conversation flowed naturally, touching on ranch matters, local news, and shared experiences of life in the territory. "How long has your family been in Arizona?" Abigail asked as she poured coffee. "Going on 15 years now," Daniel replied. "Our father brought us west from Missouri after the war. He was a Union soldier, came back different. Said he couldn't live among the ghosts anymore. Your mother died when Andrew and I were young. Consumption." He took a sip of coffee. "Father passed 5 years ago. Left the double K to us. We've been building it up since."
"No sisters?"
"Just you and Andrew?" A shadow crossed Daniel's face. "Had a sister.
"Lily."
She was 7 when fever took her, 2 years after we came west." Abigail's heart clenched with understanding. "That's why you stopped yesterday, when you saw me at the grave." Daniel nodded, his eyes distant with memory. "I still see her sometimes. In dreams. Always 7 years old. Always laughing." He blinked, coming back to the present. "Time helps, Abigail. It doesn't erase, but it helps." "Does it?" she whispered. "Right now, I can't imagine ever feeling whole again." "You won't be the same," he acknowledged. "But you'll find a way forward. We all do, somehow." As darkness fell, they moved to the porch, sitting in the old rocking chairs that had been her parents' favorite spots to watch the sunset. Stars emerged in the vast desert sky, brilliant and uncountable. "I should head back," Daniel said eventually. "Andrew will be wondering where I am." "Of course." Abigail rose with him. "Thank you for the fence and everything else." Daniel hesitated at the top of the porch steps, turning to face her. In the silver moonlight, his features were softened, almost boyish despite the scar on his jaw and the lines around his eyes that spoke of hard years under the sun. "I meant what I said about the cattle drive," he told her. "The offer stands. Just let me know before the end of next week if you want to join us." "I will," she promised. He nodded, then surprised her by gently taking her hand and giving it a brief, warm squeeze. "Good night, Abigail." She watched him ride away, his silhouette gradually disappearing into the darkness. Only when he was completely gone did she realize she was still standing on the porch steps, her hand tingling where he had touched it. Inside the silent house, Abigail moved through the rooms, extinguishing lamps and checking doors. In Thomas's small bedroom, she paused, running her fingers over his clothes still hanging on pegs. the wooden horse their father had carved for him sitting on the windowsill. "I miss you," she whispered to the empty room. "I don't know how to do this without you." No answer came, of course. Just the creaking of the old house settling for the night and the distant howl of a coyote. Abigail retreated to her own room, where sleep eventually claimed her despite her racing thoughts. For the first time since Thomas died, she didn't dream of his final moments. Instead, she dreamed of riding across open plains, the sun warm on her face, and the sound of cattle moving ahead of her. And somewhere nearby, though she couldn't see him, she knew Daniel Kincaid was riding too, keeping watch over the herd and over her. The next morning brought a clarity to Abigail's mind that had been absent for weeks. Over breakfast, she took stock of her situation with ruthless honesty. The Broken Bee had 32 head of cattle remaining, barely enough to sustain the ranch. The summer grazing would be poor due to the drought, meaning the cattle wouldn't fetch much at the local auction. If Daniel was right about prices being better in Santa Fe, joining the cattle drive might be her only chance to save the ranch. Decision made. Abigail spent the day preparing as if the drive were certain. She checked her gear, taking inventory of what she had and what she would need. Her father had taught her how to work cattle from the time she could sit a horse, but she'd never been on a long drive before. Thomas's illness had kept her close to home in recent years. 3 days passed before she saw Daniel again. She was repairing the chicken coop when the sound of approaching riders caught her attention. Looking up, she saw Daniel alongside another man who shared his build and coloring, though his hair was lighter and he lacked Daniel's scar. Abigail straightened, brushing wood shavings from her apron as the men dismounted. "Abigail," Daniel greeted her, his smile warming his serious face. "Hope we're not intruding. This is my brother, Andrew." Andrew Kincaid tipped his hat, leaning slightly on a walking stick. "Miss Brennan, pleasure to meet you. Danny's told me about your situation." Abigail nodded in acknowledgement, noting the shortening of Daniel's name and the ease between the brothers. "Mr. Kincaid, how's your ankle?" "Healing well enough," Andrew replied with a grin that made him look younger than his brother despite being the elder. "Not fast enough for my liking, but it'll be sound before the drive." "About that," Daniel said, his expression turning serious. "Have you made a decision?" Abigail met his gaze steadily.
Yes.
"I'd like to join your drive, if the offer still stands." The brothers exchanged a quick glance before Daniel nodded. "It does. We'll be glad for the company." "And the extra guns," Andrew added. "The Comanche have been active along the eastern route. We're taking the longer western trail this year. Safer, though more difficult terrain." "I can pull my weight," Abigail assured them. "My father taught me well." "Never doubted it," Daniel said quietly. Andrew looked between them, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Well, that settles it. We'll combine herds next week and move them to our northern pasture. It's closer to the trailhead." They spent the next hour discussing logistics, how many hands they'd need, what supplies to gather, which route exactly they'd take. Andrew produced a worn map, spreading it on the ground as they crouched around it. "We'll head northwest first," he explained, tracing the route with his finger. "Skirt the mountains here, then cross at Powell's Pass. There's good water at intervals the whole way if we time it right." Abigail studied the map, memorizing landmarks and distances. "How long to Santa Fe?" 3 weeks if all goes well," Daniel answered. "Could be longer if we have trouble with the herd or weather." "Or Indians," Andrew added soberly. Daniel shot his brother a look. "We'll have enough men to deter trouble. 8, counting us and Abigail. 8 against a Comanche war party isn't favorable odds," Andrew pointed out. "We'll stay alert and avoid conflict," Daniel said firmly. "This isn't Andrew's first drive," he explained to Abigail. "He likes to consider every possible disaster beforehand." "Someone has to," Andrew retorted good-naturedly, "since you'd charge headfirst into danger without a second thought." Watching them, Abigail felt a pang of longing for her own family, for the easy camaraderie she'd once shared with her father and Thomas. The grief rose fresh in her throat, threatening to choke her. Daniel noticed the change in her expression. "Abigail? Are you all right?" She swallowed hard, forcing a smile.
Yes.
Just thinking about preparations. He studied her face for a moment, clearly not believing her, but he didn't press the issue. "We should head back. There's plenty to organize before next week." As they prepared to leave, Daniel hung back while Andrew mounted his horse. "It gets easier," he said quietly, standing close enough that his words were for her alone. "Not soon, and not completely, but it does get easier." Abigail nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. "If you change your mind about the drive, there's no shame in it," he continued. "It's a hard journey even in the best of circumstances." "I won't change my mind," she managed. "The broken bee is all I have left. I'll do whatever it takes to keep it." Daniel's expression softened. "Then we'll see you through it. That's a promise, Abigail." As she watched them ride away, Abigail wondered at how quickly this man had come to matter to her. 3 days ago, he'd been a stranger. Now, he was perhaps the only person in the territory she trusted. That night, she stood on the porch long after darkness fell, gazing toward the north where the Double K Ranch lay beyond the rolling hills. For the first time since burying her brother, Abigail felt something besides grief stirring in her heart. It wasn't happiness that seemed impossible still, but perhaps it was hope. A fragile, tentative hope that she might find a way forward after all. The next week passed in a blur of preparation. Abigail worked from dawn until dusk getting ready for the drive, repairing tack, organizing supplies, and preparing the house to stand empty for over a month. Each night, she fell into bed exhausted, but the physical labor helped keep the worst of the grief at bay. Daniel rode over twice more to check on her progress and bring supplies she might need. Each visit left her feeling more confident about the journey ahead and more aware of the growing connection between them. On the day before they were to move her cattle to the Double K, Abigail rode to Thomas's grave one last time. She knelt beside the small cross, placing fresh wildflowers against it. "I have to go away for a while," she told her brother softly, "to save her home. I wish you were coming with me. I wish." Her voice broke. "I wish so many things, Thomas." She remained there until the sun began to set, speaking to her brother as if he could hear, telling him about the cattle drive, about the Kincaid brothers, about her fears and hopes. When she finally rose to leave, her heart felt lighter somehow, as if Thomas had heard and understood. "I'll come back," she promised, touching the cross one last time. "Wait for me." Dawn broke clear and cool the next morning as Abigail prepared to move her cattle. She'd been up since well before first light, saddling Penny and gathering her gear. She wore practical clothes for the trail: trousers, boots, a sturdy shirt, and a wide-brimmed hat to shield her from the sun. Her father's revolver hung at her hip, and his rifle was secured in its scabbard on her saddle. The sound of approaching riders made her look up from her final preparations. Daniel rode at the head of a small group: Andrew and 2 other men she didn't recognize. "Morning," Daniel called as they drew near. "Ready to move them out?" Abigail nodded, grateful for the extra hands. "As ready as I'll ever be." Daniel introduced the other riders as Miguel Vasquez and John Turner, 2 experienced hands who would be accompanying them on the drive. Both men touched their hats respectfully, though Abigail didn't miss the skeptical looks they exchanged when they thought she wasn't watching. "Let's get started," she said, mounting Penny. "The sooner we reach the Double K, the better." Moving the cattle went more smoothly than Abigail had dared hope. The small herd responded well to the riders, and by mid-afternoon, they were approaching the northern boundary of the Double K Ranch. Abigail couldn't help but be impressed as they crested a rise and the ranch spread out before them. The Kincaids had built a substantial operation, with a large main house, several outbuildings, and extensive corrals. In the distance, she could see their larger herd grazing in a verdant pasture. "Welcome to the Double K," Andrew said, riding up beside her. "It's impressive," she admitted. "You've done well for yourselves." "Lots of hard work," he replied. "But worth it. Our father would be proud to see it now." As they approached the ranch house, a woman emerged onto the porch, tall and straight-backed, with steel-gray hair pulled into a severe bun. Her expression was watchful as the riders drew near. "That's Mrs. Winters," Daniel explained, noticing Abigail's questioning look. "Our housekeeper. More like family, really. She came west with our father and has been with us ever since." Abigail felt suddenly self-conscious about her dusty clothes and trail-worn appearance as they dismounted in front of the house. Mrs. Winters' sharp eyes seemed to assess every detail as Daniel made introductions. "Mrs. Winters, this is Miss Abigail Brennan from the Broken Bee. She'll be joining us on the drive to Santa Fe." The older woman's eyebrows rose slightly, but she nodded in acknowledgement. "Miss Brennan, you must be tired after your journey. I've prepared the guest room. Supper will be ready at 6. "Thank you," Abigail replied, surprised by the ready welcome. "That's very kind." "Nothing kind about it," Mrs. Winters said matter-of-factly. "Just practical. Can't have you sleeping in the bunkhouse with the men, and you'll need a proper meal before the trail. Trail food's barely fit for animals, let alone people." With that, she turned and went back inside, leaving Abigail somewhat bemused. "Don't mind her manner," Andrew said with a chuckle. "She's gruff with everyone. But there's no finer cook in the territory, and she's got a good heart under all that starch." Daniel took charge of showing Abigail to the guest room while the others saw to the cattle. The house was larger than it appeared from outside, solidly built and comfortably furnished, not luxurious, but speaking of prosperity earned through hard work. "The washroom is through there," Daniel explained, indicating a door off the hallway. "Hot water's a luxury we don't often indulge in, but for your first night here, I asked Mrs. Winters to prepare a bath. It'll be ready after you've had a chance to settle in." Abigail was touched by the thoughtfulness. "Thank you." A bath sounds heavenly after the dust of the trail. Daniel hesitated in the doorway of the guest room. "I want you to know that everyone here respects what you're doing. Taking on this drive, fighting for your ranch. It takes courage. Or desperation," she said quietly. "Sometimes they look the same from the outside," he acknowledged. "But I've seen enough of both to know the difference. What you're doing, Abigail, that's courage." The warmth in his gray eyes made something flutter in her chest. Before she could respond, he stepped back into the hallway. "I'll let you rest. Supper at 6, like Mrs. Winters said. And Abigail?" He paused, his expression softening. "I'm glad you're here." After he left, Abigail sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly overwhelmed by the events of the day and the kindness of these people who were still largely strangers to her. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to believe that perhaps things might turn out all right after all. The promised bath was everything Abigail had hoped for, washing away not just the physical dust of travel, but some of the heaviness that had weighed on her spirit. She changed into the one dress she'd brought, a simple blue calico that had been her mother's favorite, and made her way downstairs as the grandfather clock in the hall struck 6. Supper was a lively affair, with the Kincaid brothers, Mrs. Winters, and the 2 trail hands gathered around a long table laden with more food than Abigail had seen in one place for months. Roast beef, potatoes, fresh baked bread, and vegetables from the kitchen garden made a feast that reminded her sharply of happier times at her own family table. Conversation flowed easily, centered mainly on preparations for the drive. Miguel and John had both made the journey to Santa Fe multiple times and shared stories of previous trips, some harrowing, others humorous. There was the time Danny here decided to chase after a stray heifer right into a wasp nest, Andrew recalled, grinning at his brother. His face swelled up so bad we called him Potato Head for the rest of the drive. Daniel shook his head, but his eyes crinkled with amusement. Still better than when you tried to impress that merchant's daughter in Tucson by showing off your roping skills and ended up lassoing yourself instead of the post. That rope had a mind of its own, Andrew insisted. Besides, she married me anyway, so it couldn't have been that bad an impression. Abigail looked up in surprise. You're married? A shadow crossed Andrew's face.
Was.
Sarah died in childbirth 3 years ago. The baby too. An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Abigail's heart ached for him. I'm sorry. I didn't know. Andrew shook off the melancholy with visible effort. No reason you would. It's in the past now. Mrs. Winters broke the tension by bringing in an apple pie for dessert, and the conversation gradually resumed, though with a more subdued tone. After the meal, while Mrs. Winters and the Hands retired for the evening, the Kincaid brothers invited Abigail to join them on the porch. The night was clear, with stars scattered like diamond dust across the velvet sky. A gentle breeze carried the scent of sage and distant rain. We'll head out day after tomorrow, Daniel said, leaning against the porch railing. The other Hands arrived tomorrow 4 more, bringing us to 9 total. Good number for a herd this size. Everything's packed and ready, Andrew added. Just need to check the wagon one more time, and we're set. Abigail nodded, sipping the coffee they'd brought out with them. I can't thank you both enough for including me in this. I know it complicates things for you. Not at all, Andrew assured her. More cattle means a better negotiating position in Santa Fe. It benefits us all. Besides, Daniel added quietly, it's the right thing to do. The simple statement touched Abigail deeply. In a world that had often seemed cold and uncaring since her family's deaths, the straightforward decency of the Kincaid brothers was like finding an unexpected oasis in the desert. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the ranch, the occasional lowing of cattle, the chirp of crickets, the distant howl of a coyote. Eventually, Andrew excused himself, leaving Abigail and Daniel alone on the porch. Your brother is a good man, Abigail observed after Andrew had gone inside. Daniel nodded. The best I know. He's held this family together through some dark times. And you, she asked softly, what role do you play in the family story? He considered the question, his profile thoughtful in the moonlight. I suppose I'm the one who follows the horizon. Andrew's the anchor, keeping us grounded. I'm always looking to what's next, what's possible. Is that why you stopped for a grieving woman at a grave? Because you saw something possible? The question surprised him. She could see it in the way his eyes widened slightly before he turned to face her fully. I stopped because no one should face that kind of pain alone, he said simply. Not because I expected anything from it. And now? Abigail pressed, not entirely sure why she needed to know. Daniel was quiet for a long moment, his eyes searching hers in the dim light. Now, he finally said, I find myself hoping for things I hadn't considered before. The admission hung between them, neither willing to define it more clearly, but both understanding its significance. Abigail's heart beat faster, and she found herself acutely aware of Daniel's proximity, of the warmth radiating from him in the cool evening air. It's getting late, she said, breaking the moment before it could become something more than she was ready for. I should turn in. Tomorrow will be busy. Daniel straightened, respecting her withdrawal. Of course. Sleep well, Abigail. As she climbed the stairs to the guest room, Abigail's mind whirled with conflicting emotions. Grief for Thomas was still a raw wound, yet here she was, feeling the first stirrings of something new, something that both frightened and intrigued her. It seemed almost a betrayal of her brother's memory to feel anything besides sorrow. Yet as she prepared for bed, Abigail found herself remembering Thomas's infectious laugh, his insistence on finding joy in even the smallest things. Perhaps, she thought, the greatest tribute to his memory wasn't endless grief, but finding a way to live fully despite the loss. With that thought bringing unexpected comfort, she drifted off to sleep, dreaming of open trails and new beginnings. The day before the drive began dawned clear and busy. The remaining hands arrived early, weathered men named Bill, Charlie, Pete, and Hank, bringing the total to 9, including Abigail. She sensed their skepticism about having a woman along but was determined to prove herself through actions rather than words. The combined herd numbered nearly 200 head, 32 from the Broken B and the rest from the Double K. It was a respectable size, enough to make the journey worthwhile, but not so large as to be unmanageable for their small crew. Abigail spent the morning helping check the supply wagon, taking inventory of food, ammunition, and medical supplies. Mrs. Winters had packed enough provisions to last them to Santa Fe, with a little extra in case of delays. "You know how to shoot that thing?" a voice asked as Abigail was checking her rifle. She looked up to see Bill, the oldest of the hands, watching her with undisguised curiosity. His weathered face held more lines than a road map, and his faded blue eyes had seen decades of hard living. "Since I was 12, Abigail replied evenly. "My father made sure of it." Bill nodded slowly.
Good.
"Trail's no place for folks who can't defend themselves." He hesitated, then added gruffly, "You need any help with anything, you ask. Don't try to prove yourself by being foolish." The advice, though bluntly delivered, was kindly meant. Abigail found herself smiling. "I appreciate that." By evening, everything was prepared for an early departure the next morning. Mrs. Winters outdid herself with a farewell supper that would be the last hot, fresh meal any of them would enjoy for weeks. The mood around the table was a mixture of excitement and focused readiness. After the meal, Daniel found Abigail on the porch, gazing toward the east where her own ranch lay beyond the hills. "Having second thoughts?" he asked gently. She shook her head.
No.
"Just saying goodbye, I suppose. To Thomas, to the life I had. It feels like everything is changing." "It is," Daniel acknowledged, coming to stand beside her at the railing. "But change isn't always bad." Abigail turned to look at him, studying the face that had become increasingly dear to her over these past weeks. "No," she agreed softly. "It isn't always bad." They stood in companionable silence until the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Then, with the journey ahead of them, they each retired early, knowing dawn would come all too quickly. The cattle drive began with the first light of day. The herd moved out under a sky painted in shades of pink and gold, the air still cool from the night, but promising heat as the sun rose higher. Abigail rode near the front with Daniel, while Andrew and the other hands took positions around the herd. For Abigail, the first day was a test of everything she'd learned from her father. Keeping cattle moving in the right direction was an art as much as a skill, requiring patience, quick thinking, and an understanding of the animal's behavior. By midday, her muscles ached from hours in the saddle, but she felt a growing confidence in her ability to keep up. They covered a respectable 15 miles before making camp for the night near a small creek. The routine established itself quickly, cattle first, ensuring they had water and decent grazing, then setting up the humans' camp, preparing a simple meal, and assigning watch shifts for the night. Abigail insisted on taking her turn at watch, despite some grumbling from Charlie, who clearly thought guard duty was no place for a woman. "She rides a full shift. She takes a full watch," Daniel said firmly, ending the discussion before it could become an argument. The first week on the trail fell into a rhythm up before dawn, moving the herd while the day was still cool, resting during the worst of the afternoon heat when possible, then pushing on until dusk. The work was exhausting but satisfying in a way Abigail hadn't expected. Out here, with endless sky above and the constant motion of the herd, her grief seemed less immediate, less consuming. Daniel rode beside her when he could, their conversations ranging from practical matters of the trail to deeper exchanges about their lives and hopes. Abigail found herself opening up to him in ways she hadn't with anyone since her father died, sharing memories of Thomas, of her parents, of the dreams she'd once had for the Broken Bee. In return, Daniel told her of his own journey coming west as a boy, losing a sister, working alongside his father and brother to build the Double K from nothing into a thriving ranch. He spoke of his mother, whom he barely remembered but whose lullabies sometimes still came to him in dreams. On the 8th day, they encountered their first real challenge. A sudden thunderstorm swept across the plains, turning the trail to mud and spooking the cattle. Lightning cracked overhead as rain poured down in sheets, reducing visibility to mere yards. "Keep them together," Daniel shouted over the storm's roar. "Don't let them scatter." Abigail, soaked to the skin and fighting to control Penny as the mare danced nervously beneath her, rode hard to turn back cattle that tried to break away from the herd. Her hat had blown off long ago, and her hair hung in wet ropes down her back, but she kept riding, kept working, fueled by determination and the knowledge that everyone else was doing the same. Through the curtain of rain, she spotted a group of cattle veering away from the main herd, heading toward a ravine that could mean broken legs or worse. Without hesitation, she urged Penny after them, cutting across their path to turn them back. Lightning struck a tree just ahead, the explosion of sound and light causing the cattle to panic further. Penny reared, nearly unseating Abigail, who clung to the saddle horn and fought to regain control. As the mare came back down, Abigail saw a young steer charging directly toward them, head lowered and eyes wild with fear. Before she could react, a rider appeared between her and the steer, horse turning sideways to block the animal's charge. Daniel's voice cut through the storm as he forced the steer to change direction, rejoining the others. "You all right?" he called to Abigail, rain streaming down his face. She nodded, heart pounding from the near miss.
"Yes.
"Thank you." They worked side by side for the next hour, gradually bringing the herd under control as the storm began to abate. By the time the rain stopped, everyone was exhausted, but the cattle were together and no one was seriously hurt. That night, huddled around a meager fire as their clothes steamed in the aftermath of the storm, Andrew raised his coffee cup in a toast. "To Miss Brennan," he said, his voice carrying to the entire group, "who rides as well as any man here, and better than some." The other hands nodded in agreement, even Charlie, who had been the most skeptical of her abilities. Abigail felt a flush of pride and acceptance warm her more effectively than the fire. Later, as she prepared to turn in for the night, her bedroll set slightly apart from the men's for privacy, Daniel approached with a spare blanket. "Thought you might need this," he said, offering it to her. "Nights get cold after a storm." Abigail accepted it gratefully. "Thank you. For this, and for earlier, with the steer." Daniel shrugged off her thanks. "You'd have done the same for any of us." He hesitated, then added more quietly, "You're doing well, Abigail. Better than well. Your father would be proud." The simple praise meant more to her than he could know. Abigail blinked back sudden tears, nodding her thanks when words failed her. Daniel seemed to understand. He squeezed her shoulder gently, then left her to her rest, disappearing into the darkness beyond the firelight. As Abigail lay in her bedroll that night, listening to the sounds of the cattle and the soft snores of the sleeping men, she realized something had shifted within her. The pain of losing Thomas was still there, a wound that might never fully heal, but alongside it now was a growing sense of purpose, of belonging. These men, this journey, they were becoming part of her story in ways she hadn't anticipated. And Daniel Kincaid, with his quiet strength and unwavering support, was becoming something more than just a neighbor or friend. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. The second week on the trail brought them into more difficult terrain as they began to skirt the mountains. The trail narrowed in places, forcing them to move the cattle in smaller groups through passes and along ridgelines. Progress slowed, but Daniel assured everyone they were still on schedule for Santa Fe. On the 12th day, while crossing a particularly rocky stretch, one of the Double K steers stumbled and went down hard, breaking a leg. There was no saving the animal. After the others moved the herd ahead, Daniel put the steer out of its misery with a clean shot. "We'll butcher it," he decided. "Fresh meat tonight instead of salt pork." The unexpected feast lifted everyone's spirits. As they sat around the fire that evening, savoring the roasted beef, stories began to flow more freely than usual. Pete, who rarely spoke, revealed he'd once been a schoolteacher back east before the war changed everything. Hank had grown up in a logging camp in Oregon. Miguel shared tales of his childhood in Mexico before crossing the border seeking work. "What about you, Miss Brennan?" Bill asked, passing her a tin cup of coffee. "What would you be doing if you weren't ranching?" Abigail considered the question, realizing she'd never really thought about any other life. "I don't know," she admitted. "The ranch is all I've ever known. But I suppose. I've always loved books. My mother taught school before she married my father. She made sure I could read and cipher and know something of the world beyond our land." "A teacher, then?" Andrew suggested. Abigail smiled slightly. "Perhaps. Though I'm not sure I have the patience for a room full of children." "You have the patience for a herd of cattle," Daniel pointed out. "Children can't be much different." The comparison drew laughter from everyone, easing the weariness of the day's hard travel. As the evening wore on, Miguel produced a battered harmonica and played a few melancholy tunes that seemed to perfectly suit the vast, star-filled night. When the music ended, the men gradually drifted off to their bedrolls, leaving just Abigail and Daniel by the dying fire. The comfortable silence between them had become a familiar thing, a shared space where neither felt compelled to fill the air with unnecessary words. 16 more days to Santa Fe if all goes well, Daniel eventually said, poking at the embers with a stick. "And then?" Abigail asked. He glanced at her, the firelight casting shadows across his features. "Then you save your ranch. Go home. Start again." There was something in his tone that made Abigail look at him more closely. "Is that what you want? For me to go back to the Broken Bee and just continue as before?" Daniel was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire as if it held answers to questions he hadn't yet asked. "What I want," he finally said, his voice low, "is for you to have choices, Abigail. Real choices, not decisions forced by desperation. And if my choice were to not return to the Broken Bee? To find another path." The question hung between them, loaded with implications neither was quite ready to voice. Daniel's eyes met hers across the fire, intense and searching. "Then I'd wish you well on whatever path you chose," he said carefully. "But I'd hope that path might sometimes cross with mine." Abigail's heart quickened at the admission. Before she could respond, a shout from the edge of camp shattered the moment. "Riders coming in," Charlie called from his watch position. "At least 6, moving fast." Daniel was on his feet, instantly, rifle in hand. The other men emerged from their bedrolls, reaching for weapons as they moved to defensive positions. "Abigail, stay down," Daniel ordered, positioning himself between her and the approaching riders. For once, she didn't argue, taking cover behind the supply wagon while drawing her father's revolver. The thundering of hooves grew louder as the unknown riders approached the camp. "Hold your fire until we know who they are," Andrew called, his voice steady despite the tension. The riders slowed as they reached the edge of the firelight. There were 7 of them, rough-looking men with bandanas pulled up to cover the lower half of their faces. Their leader, a tall man on a black horse, raised his hand in what might have been a greeting or a signal to his companions. "Evening, gentlemen," he called, his voice carrying a southern drawl. "Quite a herd you've got there." "It serves our purposes," Andrew replied cautiously. "What brings you out this way after dark?" The leader chuckled, the sound devoid of humor. "Just being neighborly. Thought we'd check who was passing through our territory." Wasn't aware this land belonged to anyone, Daniel said, his rifle still raised. Well now, ownership's a funny thing out here, isn't it? The leader's eyes scanned the camp, pausing when he spotted Abigail partially hidden behind the wagon. What have we here? You boys brought a woman on the drive. Abigail felt a chill at the way he said it, but she stood her ground, keeping her revolver ready. Our business is our own, Andrew said firmly. We're just passing through, heading to Santa Fe. Santa Fe, huh? Good market there. The leader seemed to consider something, then nodded to his men. Well, we won't keep you from your rest. Long journey ahead. The abrupt change in tone made Abigail even more wary. These men hadn't ridden up in the middle of the night for a friendly chat. Obliged for your concern, Daniel said, his posture still tense and ready. The leader tipped his hat. We'll be seeing you folks again, I expect. Safe travels. With that, the riders wheeled their horses and galloped away into the darkness, leaving an uneasy silence in their wake. I don't like it, Bill muttered once they were gone. Those weren't any ranchers I've ever seen. Rustlers, Andrew agreed grimly. Or worse. Daniel turned to the men. Double the watch tonight. No one sleeps alone. First sign of trouble, raise the alarm. As the others moved to follow his instructions, Daniel came to where Abigail still stood by the wagon. Are you all right? She nodded, returning her revolver to its holster. I'm fine. But those men will be back, he finished for her. Maybe not tonight, but soon. They're sizing up the herd, looking for weakness. What do we do? Daniel's expression was resolute. We stay alert, keep moving, and if they come back looking for trouble, we make sure they regret it. The encounter cast a shadow over the next few days of the drive. Everyone rode with weapons close at hand, and conversations around the campfire were subdued, often turning to strategies for defending the herd if attacked. On the third day after the night riders' visit, they reached Powell's Pass, the narrow gap through the mountains that would lead them to the final stretch of trail to Santa Fe. The pass was barely wide enough for 20 cattle at a time, meaning they would have to move the herd through in smaller groups of vulnerable position if the rustlers were watching. We'll split into 3 teams, Daniel decided after surveying the pass. Andrew, you take Miguel and Charlie with the first group. Bill, Pete, and I will take the second. Hank, Abigail, and John will bring up the rear with the last group and the wagon. Abigail understood the logic, the most experienced hands with each group, but she couldn't help feeling uneasy about being separated from Daniel during such a vulnerable crossing. It'll take most of the day, Andrew observed, shading his eyes as he looked up at the sun. Last group won't make it through before dark. Can't be helped, Daniel replied. We'll make camp at the far end of the pass and wait for everyone to get through. As they prepared to separate the herd, Daniel pulled Abigail aside. Stay sharp, he told her quietly. If anything happens, anything at all that doesn't feel right, fire 3 shots. We'll come back. I will, she promised. But you be careful too. His eyes softened as he looked at her. Always am. The first group moved into the pass without incident, Andrew leading with Miguel and Charlie keeping the cattle in a tight line. Daniel's group followed an hour later, the cattle moving steadily through the narrow passage. Abigail's group prepared to enter the pass in late afternoon, the shadows already lengthening as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon. Hank led the way, with Abigail and John flanking the remaining cattle. The supply wagon, driven by Bill, brought up the very rear. They were halfway through the pass when Abigail heard a faint rumble that seemed to come from the rocky slopes above them. She reined in Penny, listening intently. The rumble came again, louder this time, followed by the distinctive crack of a rifle shot. Ambush! Hank shouted as rocks began to tumble down from the ridge above, spooking the cattle. Abigail drew her revolver as riders appeared on both sides of the pass, the same men who had visited their camp 3 nights earlier, now with faces fully visible and weapons drawn. 3 shots. John yelled to her as he fired at one of the attackers. "Signal the others." Abigail raised her revolver and fired 3 quick shots into the air, the sound echoing off the rock walls of the pass. Then she turned Penny toward the cattle, which were beginning to scatter in panic. A bullet whizzed past her head as one of the rustlers took aim. Abigail fired back, not sure if she hit anything but determined to put up a fight. Ahead, she could see Hank engaged in a shootout with 2 attackers, while behind her, Bill was defending the wagon against another. The battle seemed to last forever, though it was probably only minutes. Abigail fought to keep the cattle from stampeding while returning fire when she could. She saw John go down, clutching his shoulder, and moved Penny closer to provide cover for him. Just as she was beginning to fear they would be overwhelmed, the thunder of hooves echoed through the pass. Daniel and Andrew appeared with the others, riding hard back toward the fight, guns blazing. The rustlers, caught between 2 groups of defenders, began to fall back. Their leader shouted something Abigail couldn't make out, and they retreated up the slopes, firing a few last shots as they disappeared over the ridge. "Abigail." Daniel's voice cut through the chaos as he reached her side. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, adrenaline still coursing through her veins.
No.
"But John's been shot, and I think Hank took a bullet too." Daniel's eyes swept over her, as if needing to confirm for himself that she was truly unharmed. The relief in his face was palpable. "Stay here. We need to secure the pass and check for other injuries." The aftermath of the ambush was grim, but could have been worse. John and Hank had both been shot but would survive with proper care. They'd lost 12 head of cattle in the confusion, some shot by the rustlers, others having run off the trail in panic. The wagon had taken damage from bullets, but the supplies inside were mostly intact. They made camp at the far end of the pass, setting up a defensive perimeter in case the rustlers returned. Andrew and Miguel tended to the wounded while the others secured the remaining cattle and assessed the damages. Abigail found Daniel standing alone at the edge of camp, his expression troubled as he gazed back toward the pass. "It's not your fault," she said softly, coming to stand beside him. "I should have anticipated this," he replied, his voice tight with self-recrimination. The pass was the obvious place for an ambush. "We all knew the risks," Abigail reminded him. "No one blames you, Daniel." He turned to face her, and in the fading light, she could see a small cut on his cheek where a bullet or rock fragment had grazed him. Without thinking, she reached up to touch it gently. "You're hurt." Daniel caught her hand, holding it against his face for a moment before slowly lowering it. "It's nothing." His eyes searched hers, intense and conflicted. "When I heard those shots. When I thought you might be." He couldn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. Abigail understood what he wasn't saying, because the same fear had gripped her heart when she'd watched him ride back into danger. "I'm all right," she assured him. "We all are, more or less." Daniel nodded, though the worry didn't leave his eyes. "We'll rest here tonight. Double the watch again. Tomorrow we'll get John and Hank more comfortable in the wagon and push on to Santa Fe." As he turned to go, Abigail caught his arm. "Daniel, thank you for coming back for us." He looked at her for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them. Then, with a gentleness that belied his strength, he drew her into his arms, holding her close as if reassuring himself that she was truly safe. Abigail leaned into his embrace, the solid warmth of him anchoring her after the chaos of the day. They stayed that way for several heartbeats, neither willing to be the first to pull away. When they finally separated, Daniel's hand lingered on her waist. "Get some rest," he said softly. "I'll take first watch." Abigail nodded, reluctantly stepping back. As she made her way to her bedroll, she felt his eyes following her, a tangible connection that somehow made the night seem less dark. The final days of the journey to Santa Fe passed without further incident, though everyone remained on high alert. The rustlers didn't reappear, perhaps deterred by the show of strength or simply biding their time for another opportunity. John and Hank improved steadily, thanks to Andrew's surprisingly skilled medical care. By the time the distant buildings of Santa Fe appeared on the horizon, both men were able to ride short distances, though they still spent most of the day in the wagon. For Abigail, the sight of the town represented more than just the end of their journey. It was the culmination of all her hopes since leaving the Broken Bee, the chance to save her home, to honor her family's legacy, to build a future of her own choosing. As they made camp for the last night on the trail, the mood was celebratory despite their recent hardships. They'd made it through with minimal losses, and tomorrow would bring the cattle auction and, hopefully, good prices for their herds. To success in Santa Fe, Andrew toasted, raising his coffee cup. And to new friends who've become family on the trail. Everyone echoed the sentiment, cups clinking together around the fire. Abigail found herself seated beside Daniel, their shoulders nearly touching as they shared the warmth of the flames. "What will you do?" she asked him quietly, while the others were engaged in conversation. "After Santa Fe?" Daniel considered the question, his profile thoughtful in the firelight. "Head back to the Double K. There's always work waiting." He glanced at her. "And you?" "Back to the Broken Bee." Abigail stared into the fire, uncertain how to express the thoughts that had been forming in her mind these past weeks. "I don't know," she admitted. "The ranch was my father's dream, then my responsibility after he died. I've never really asked myself what I want. And now, what does Abigail Brennan want?" She met his gaze, finding the courage to speak the truth. "I want to stop just surviving. I want to live again. To build something that's truly mine, not just a legacy I'm trying to preserve." Daniel's eyes softened with understanding. The Broken Bee could be that, You could make it your own, shape it into whatever you want it to be. "Perhaps," she agreed, "but it would be a lonely path." The implication hung between them, neither quite ready to address it directly. Daniel reached out, his hand covering hers where it rested on the log between them. "It doesn't have to be," he said softly. Before Abigail could respond, Andrew called Daniel's name, needing help with one of the horses that had developed a limp. The moment passed, but the warmth of his touch lingered on her hand long after he had gone. That night, as Abigail lay in her bedroll looking up at the vast expanse of stars, she allowed herself to imagine possibilities that had seemed unthinkable just weeks ago. A life not defined by loss and struggle but by choice and perhaps even happiness. It was a fragile hope, but for the first time since Thomas's death, it felt within reach. Morning brought a flurry of activity as they prepared for the final push into Santa Fe. The cattle were rounded up, the wagon repacked, and by mid-morning, they were moving toward the town that had been their destination for so long. Santa Fe bustled with activity traders, settlers, soldiers, and locals, creating a vibrant tapestry of humanity that was a stark contrast to the isolation of the trail. The cattle auction was scheduled for the following day, giving them time to settle their herd in the holding pens on the outskirts of town. Once the cattle were secured, Daniel and Andrew took Abigail to meet the buyer they'd worked with on previous drives, a substantial man named Harrison James who represented several meat-packing companies back east. Kincaid Brothers. James greeted them warmly, shaking hands. "Good to see you made it. Heard there was trouble on the trail this year." "Nothing we couldn't handle," Andrew replied with a smile. James turned his attention to Abigail, eyebrows raised in surprise. "And who might this be?" "Abigail Brennan of the Broken Bee," Daniel introduced her. "Our partner on this drive." James looked skeptical. "Partner? Don't see many women in the cattle business." "Miss Brennan's cattle are prime stock," Daniel said firmly. "Better than most we've seen at auction." Abigail appreciated his support, but stepped forward to speak for herself. "My father bred our herd for quality, Mr. James. You won't find better beef in the territory." James studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Well, I'll judge for myself tomorrow at the auction. But if the Kincaids vouch for you, that carries weight. After arranging details for the auction, they secured rooms at a modest hotel, a luxury after weeks of sleeping on the ground. The trail hands went their separate ways to enjoy the town's offerings, while Andrew took John and Hank to see the doctor about their wounds. Daniel offered to show Abigail around Santa Fe, and she accepted gladly. The town was larger and more sophisticated than Willow Springs, with a distinctive blend of Mexican and American influences in its architecture and culture. They visited the main plaza, the cathedral, and several shops where Abigail purchased a few necessities for the journey home. As the afternoon waned, they found themselves at a small cafe with a view of the mountains that had been such a challenging part of their journey. "It's strange," Abigail remarked as they sat at a table near the window, "to think that tomorrow will determine whether I keep my home or lose it." Daniel studied her across the table. "Whatever happens at the auction, you'll land on your feet, Abigail. I've never met anyone more capable." She smiled at the compliment. "High praise from a man who's probably seen more of the world than I ever will." "Not that much more," he admitted. "Though I did make it to Chicago once before the war. Seemed like another planet compared to this." "Would you go back? To the cities, I mean?" Daniel shook his head without hesitation.
No.
"This is where I belong, open country, room to breathe. Can't imagine being hemmed in by buildings and crowds again. Even though ranching is such hard work, such uncertainty." "Especially because of that," he said, leaning forward slightly. "There's something honest about it. You put in the work, you face the challenges, and at the end of the day, you can see what you've built with your own hands." Abigail nodded, understanding completely. "That's how my father felt. It's how I feel too, I suppose, despite everything." As they talked, the setting sun cast a golden glow over the cafe, warming Daniel's features and highlighting the small scar along his jaw. Abigail found herself studying him, committing to memory the details of his face, the laugh lines around his eyes, the slight crook in his nose from being broken long ago, the way his expression softened when he spoke of things that mattered to him. "What?" he asked, noticing her scrutiny. "Nothing," she replied, feeling suddenly self-conscious. "Just thinking how strange life is. A month ago, I was at my brother's grave, certain my world had ended. And now I'm here, with you, feeling." "Feeling what?" Daniel prompted gently, when she didn't continue. Abigail met his gaze directly. "Alive again. Because of you." The simple admission hung between them, more powerful than any elaborate declaration could have been. Daniel reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "Abigail," he began, his voice low and earnest, "these past weeks, riding with you, getting to know you, it's changed things for me, changed how I see my future." Her heart quickened at his words, hope and fear tangling in her chest. "What are you saying, Daniel?" Before he could answer, the cafe door opened, and Andrew entered, spotting them immediately. The moment broken, Daniel released her hand as his brother approached their table. "There you are," Andrew said, seemingly oblivious to the tension he'd interrupted. "Good news from the doctor, John, and Hank will make full recoveries. And I ran into James again. Word is, beef prices are at a record high. Tomorrow could be very profitable indeed." The conversation turned to the auction and plans for the following day. Abigail participated politely, but part of her mind remained fixed on what Daniel had been about to say before Andrew's arrival. As they walked back to the hotel in the gathering dusk, Abigail found herself hanging back slightly, watching the brothers as they discussed business ahead of her. They were so similar in some ways, the same tall build, the same confident stride, yet so different in others. Andrew was more outgoing, quick to laugh, while Daniel had a quieter intensity, observing much and speaking only when he had something worth saying. At the hotel, they bid each other good night in the hallway outside their rooms. Andrew retired immediately, tired from the day's activities, but Daniel lingered as Abigail stood at her door. "What were you going to say?" she asked softly. "At the cafe, before Andrew came in." Daniel glanced down the empty hallway, then back to her. "This isn't the place. But after the auction tomorrow, we should talk. There are things I need to say to you, Abigail." The seriousness in his tone made her both nervous and hopeful.
All right.
After the auction. He hesitated, then reached out to brush a strand of hair from her face, his touch feather-light. "Good night, Abigail." "Good night, Daniel." As she closed the door behind her, Abigail leaned against it, her heart racing at the promise of tomorrow's conversation. Whatever Daniel wanted to say, she sensed it would change everything between them for better or worse. The auction day dawned bright and clear. Abigail wore her blue dress again, freshly washed and pressed by the hotel staff. She wanted to look her best, both for the business at hand and for whatever might come after. The auction grounds were already crowded when they arrived. Ranchers from across the territory had brought their cattle to sell, creating a competitive atmosphere that Andrew assured her was good for prices. The Broken Bee cattle were scheduled to be auctioned first, followed by the Double K herd. Abigail stood with Daniel and Andrew near the auction ring, heart pounding as the auctioneer began his rapid-fire patter. The bidding started slowly, but quickly gained momentum as buyers recognized the quality of her stock. Harrison James was among the bidders, his voice confident as he drove the price higher. When the final bid was accepted, Abigail could hardly believe the amount, nearly twice what she had hoped for. "Congratulations," Daniel murmured, a proud smile lighting his face. "You've saved the Broken Bee." Abigail nodded, speechless with relief and joy. The money from the sale would not only pay the bank debt, but leave enough to hire hands and make improvements to the ranch. For the first time in years, the future of the Broken Bee looked secure. The Double K cattle sold equally well, bringing a substantial sum that had Andrew grinning from ear to ear. By early afternoon, the business was concluded, with payments secured and paperwork signed. "This calls for a celebration," Andrew declared. "Best restaurant in Santa Fe tonight, my treat." Abigail glanced at Daniel, remembering their promised conversation. He met her eyes, a silent understanding passing between them. "Actually," he said to his brother, "I thought Abigail might like to see the sunset from Vista Point. It's her first time in Santa Fe, after all." Andrew looked between them, a knowing smile spreading across his face. "Of course. Vista Point. Beautiful this time of year."
He winked at Abigail.
"Don't worry, I'll make sure the boys don't spend all their earnings in one night." As Andrew walked away, Abigail raised an eyebrow at Daniel. "Vista Point. It's real," he assured her with a smile. "And the view is spectacular. But mostly, I wanted somewhere quiet where we could talk." "I'd like that," she said softly. They collected horses from the livery stable, not their trail mounts, which deserved rest, but fresh animals hired for the day. Daniel led the way out of town, following a trail that wound up into the foothills overlooking Santa Fe. Vista Point proved to be exactly as promised, a rocky outcropping that offered a sweeping panorama of the town below and the surrounding landscape. They arrived with plenty of time before sunset, dismounting to stand at the edge, the world spread out before them. "It's beautiful," Abigail breathed, taking in the vista. "Yes," Daniel agreed, though when she turned to look at him, she found he wasn't watching the view but looking at her instead. A warm flush crept up her neck as she met his gaze. "You wanted to talk," she reminded him gently. Daniel nodded, suddenly seeming uncertain despite his usual confidence. He took off his hat, holding it in his hands as he had that first day by Thomas's grave. "Abigail, I've been thinking a lot about the future, about what comes after this drive." "So have I," she admitted. He took a deep breath, as if gathering courage. "When I first saw you at your brother's grave, I stopped because I recognized your grief. I know what it's like to lose someone you love, to feel like the world has ended." Abigail nodded, remembering the raw pain of those early days. What I didn't expect, Daniel continued, was to find someone who would change the way I see my own life. Someone who would make me want more than I've allowed myself to want for a very long time. Her heart quickened at his words. What is it you want, Daniel? He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of blue in his gray eyes. I want you, Abigail. Not just for now, not just for a while. I want to build a life with you. The simple declaration took her breath away. Daniel. I know it's soon, he rushed on. I know you're still grieving, still finding your way. And I would never ask you to give up the broken, be it's your home, your heritage. But maybe there's a way to combine our lives, our ranches. You mean a partnership? She asked, needing to be clear about what he was proposing. Daniel shook his head, a slight smile touching his lips.
No, Abigail.
I mean marriage. I'm asking if you could see yourself as my wife. If you could love me, as I've come to love you. The word love hung in the air between them, honest and undeniable. Abigail's mind raced, trying to process what he was offering, not just companionship or practical assistance, but a true partnership founded on deep feeling. I know it's sudden, Daniel said when she didn't immediately respond. And if you need time, Abigail stopped him by placing her hand on his cheek, the same way she'd touched his wound after the ambush. It is sudden, she agreed softly. But then so was meeting you. So was everything that's happened since that day at Thomas's grave. Hope flickered in Daniel's eyes as he covered her hand with his own. Does that mean? It means, Abigail said, finding certainty in the depths of her heart, that sometimes life takes us down unexpected trails. And sometimes, if we're very fortunate, those trails lead us exactly where we need to be. She stepped closer, closing the small distance between them. I love you too, Daniel Kincaid. I don't know how it happened so quickly, or why my heart chose you in the midst of such grief, but it did. And yes, I will marry you. The joy that transformed his face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. Daniel wrapped his arms around her, lifting her slightly off the ground in his enthusiasm. When he set her down, he cupped her face in his hands, his expression suddenly serious. I promise you, Abigail, I will do everything in my power to make you happy. To make a life with you that honors the memory of those we've lost while building something new that's entirely our own. I believe you, she whispered. And I promise the same. The setting sun bathed them in golden light as Daniel lowered his head to hers. Their first kiss was gentle, a tender affirmation of the commitment they'd just made. The second was deeper, carrying all the emotion that had been building between them since that first meeting by a small grave. When they finally parted, breathless and smiling, the sun had dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and purple. Abigail leaned against Daniel's chest, his arms wrapped securely around her as they watched darkness slowly claim the landscape. What will Andrew say? She asked after a while. Daniel chuckled, the sound rumbling pleasantly under her ear. He'll say it's about time. He's been dropping hints since the second week on the trail. And Mrs. Winters? She'll be thrilled to have another woman at the Double K. Though she'll probably insist on teaching you her way of running a household. Abigail lifted her head to look at him. The Double K? What about the Broken B? Daniel's expression turned thoughtful. That's something we'll need to figure out together. The ranches aren't so far apart that we couldn't manage both, at least for a while. And in time, maybe we could expand, connect the properties. The practical considerations were important, but in that moment, Abigail was more concerned with the emotional reality of what they were planning. Do you think Thomas would approve? And my parents? Daniel's eyes softened with understanding. I think they would want you to be happy, Abigail. To live fully, to love deeply. That's what we all want for those we care about. She nodded, finding comfort in his words. When shall we be married? "Whenever you wish," he replied. "Though I admit, I'm not inclined to wait too long." "Nor am I," Abigail agreed with a smile. "Perhaps when we return home, a small ceremony at the Double K, with just those who matter most to us?" "Perfect," Daniel said, sealing the agreement with another kiss. "And afterward, we'll visit Thomas together, to let him know you're not alone anymore." Tears pricked at Abigail's eyes, not the bitter tears of grief that had consumed her for so long, but gentle tears of healing and hope. "I would like that very much." As full darkness settled over Vista Point, they reluctantly mounted their horses for the ride back to town. The lights of Santa Fe twinkled below them, a constellation of human endeavor in the vast wilderness. Abigail felt a profound sense of peace as they descended the trail. The pain of losing Thomas would never completely fade, but alongside it now was the promise of new joy, new connections, new life. She had gone from sitting alone at a grave to riding beside the man who would be her husband, all in the space of a few short weeks. Life, she was learning, didn't move in straight, predictable lines. It twisted and turned like a cattle trail through the mountains, sometimes leading through darkness and danger, but also revealing unexpected vistas of beauty and hope along the way. And sometimes, if you were fortunate, it brought you exactly where you needed to be, even when that place was nowhere you had ever planned to go. The wedding took place 3 weeks later at the Double K Ranch. It was a simple affair, attended by Andrew, Mrs. Winters, the trail hands who had become like family, and a handful of neighbors. Abigail wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully preserved all these years, with wildflowers in her hair instead of a veil. Daniel waited for her on the porch of the ranch house, looking both nervous and elated as she walked toward him on Andrew's arm. The local preacher spoke the traditional words, but it was the vows Daniel and Abigail exchanged, promises written from their hearts, that brought tears to everyone's eyes. "I take you, Abigail, as my wife and partner," Daniel said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "I promise to walk beside you through whatever trails life leads us down, to share in your joys and sorrows, to build a home and a future worthy of the love we've found." Abigail's voice trembled slightly as she responded, "I take you, Daniel, as my husband and companion. I promise to face life's challenges with you, to find laughter even in difficult times, to create a family where love and memory are both honored. You found me in my darkest hour and helped me see that dawn would come again. I give you my heart, fully and without reservation." When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Daniel kissed her with a tenderness that spoke volumes about the depth of his feeling. The small crowd cheered, and even Mrs. Winters wiped away a tear before briskly announcing that dinner was ready. The celebration lasted well into the evening, with music and dancing under the stars. As promised, Miguel played his harmonica, joined by Pete on a borrowed fiddle, creating a lively soundtrack for the festivities. Late in the night, when most of the guests had departed or retired to the bunkhouse, Daniel and Abigail slipped away from the ranch. They rode together to a special destination, the small grave on the hill at the Broken Bee. In the silver moonlight, they stood together beside Thomas's cross. Daniel removed his hat respectfully as Abigail knelt to place fresh flowers on the grave. "Hello, Thomas," she said softly. "I've brought someone to meet you. This is Daniel, my husband now." She touched the weathered wood of the cross, a gentle caress. "I miss you every day. I always will. But I wanted you to know that I'm not alone anymore. I've found happiness again, in a way I never thought possible." Daniel knelt beside her, his arm around her shoulders. "I wish I could have known you, Thomas," he said to the grave. "But I promise to take care of your sister, to honor your memory, and to make sure you're never forgotten." They remained there in silent communion for several minutes before rising to return to their new shared life. As they walked back to their horses, Abigail looked over her shoulder one last time at the small cross silhouetted against the night sky. Goodbye for now, she whispered. I'll be back soon. The ride back to the Double K was peaceful, the night alive with the sounds of crickets and the occasional call of an owl. They rode close together, hands occasionally reaching across the space between them, connected by more than just physical touch. Are you happy? Daniel asked as the lights of the ranch came into view. Abigail considered the question, weighing the complex mixture of emotions in her heart, the lingering grief for Thomas, the joy of her new marriage, the excitement and trepidation about the future. Yes, she answered truthfully. Not in the simple way I was happy before losing Thomas. It's different now. Deeper somehow. Like the happiness has roots that go down into the sorrow and draw strength from it. Daniel nodded, understanding in his eyes. That's how it is, I think. Real happiness isn't about never feeling pain. It's about finding joy despite the pain because of the pain. About knowing the value of what you have because you understand what it means to lose. Exactly. Abigail agreed, marveling at how he seemed to understand her thoughts almost before she could articulate them herself. As they neared the ranch house, their home now, Abigail felt a sense of rightness settle over her. The path ahead would not be without challenges. There would be difficult decisions about managing both ranches, possibilities of expanding their holdings, or perhaps even selling one property to invest in the other. There would be the everyday trials of ranching life: drought, harsh winters, market fluctuations, the constant work of keeping cattle healthy and land productive. But she would face those challenges with Daniel beside her, their strengths combined, their weaknesses balanced by each other. And perhaps, in time, there would be children, new lives to fill their homes with laughter and purpose, to carry forward both the Brennan and Kincaid legacies. What are you thinking about? Daniel asked as they dismounted in front of the house. Abigail smiled up at him, her heart full. The future. Our future. Daniel took her hand, lifting it to his lips. Mrs. Kincaid, he said, his eyes warm with promise, our future begins tonight. As they crossed the threshold together, Abigail knew with absolute certainty that though her journey had begun in grief beside a small cross, it had led her exactly where she was meant to be, in the arms of a cowboy who had taught her that love could bloom even in the shadow of loss, that happiness could return even after the darkest night, that life, with all its unexpected turns, was still very much worth living. And somewhere, she believed, Thomas was smiling.